The federal cannabis rescheduling process just took a dramatic turn. The DEA has announced that participants will be allowed to participate in the upcoming marijuana rescheduling hearing, and according to reports, every participant selected appears to oppose broader cannabis reform. Organizations and advocates that support rescheduling were reportedly left out of the process. This development has created significant concern throughout the cannabis industry because many operators believe the hearing would include a broad range of viewpoints from both supporters and opponents of rescheduling. I'm Daniel Sabet, CFO at GreenGrowth CPAs, and I've spent years helping cannabis businesses navigate regulatory uncertainty, tax planning, and strategic growth. One thing I've learned is that markets hate uncertainty, investors hate uncertainty, operators hate uncertainty, and right now, uncertainty is exactly what this hearing is creating. The cannabis industry has spent years waiting for meaningful federal reform. Operators have built businesses, raised capital, signed leases, hired employees, and invested millions of dollars while operating under a federal framework that still treats most cannabis activity as illegal. The possibility of federal rescheduling represented one of the biggest policy shifts the industry has seen in decades. Now many operators are wondering what happens next. The answer is more complicated than most headlines suggest. Because while this hearing is important, it is only one step in a much larger process. To understand why this matters, it's important to understand what is actually being debated. In April of 2026, the federal government moved certain state-licensed medical marijuana activities and FDA-approved marijuana products from Schedule I to Schedule III under federal law. However, broader recreational cannabis activity remained unsolved, and the DEA scheduled a hearing beginning June 29, 2026 to consider whether marijuana more broadly should be moved to Schedule III. For cannabis operators, Schedule III treatment could be transformational. The biggest reason is Section 280E of the tax code. Today, most cannabis businesses cannot deduct ordinary business expenses because they are considered Schedule I operators under federal tax law. These include costs such as payroll, marketing, professional fees, rent, insurance, and interest expense. Many of these deductions are currently limited or disallowed because of 280E. That creates enormous tax burdens that can consume cash flow and limit growth. Rescheduling can change that. For many operators, the elimination or reduction of 280E exposure would have a greater financial impact than almost any other regulatory change. I've worked with operators who generated strong revenue but struggled with profitability because of federal tax treatment. I've also seen businesses that would become dramatically more valuable if federal tax burdens were reduced. That is why every development in the rescheduling process receives so much attention. The financial implications are massive. The controversy surrounding this hearing centers on who gets a seat at the table. According to reports, the DEA invited organizations such as Smart Approaches to Marijuana, certain state government representatives, law enforcement related groups, and other individuals who have historically opposed cannabis reform. Supporters of broader rescheduling and legalization were reportedly excluded from participation. Whether that ultimately affects the outcome remains to be seen. The reality is that administrative hearings are only one component of the federal decision-making process. Scientific evidence, legal analysis, agency findings, public comments, and political considerations all play a role. The Department of Health and Human Services previously concluded that marijuana had accepted medical use and recommended movement to Schedule III. That recommendation becomes one of the key foundations of the rescheduling process. The hearing itself is currently scheduled to begin on June 29, 2026 and continue through mid-July. From a business perspective, operators should avoid making major strategic decisions based solely on headlines surrounding the hearing participants. Markets often overreact to procedural developments. What matters most is that the final regulatory outcome. A hearing participant list may generate headlines. A final rule changes businesses. Those are very different things. The operators who succeed through regulatory transitions are usually the ones who focus on preparation rather than speculation. They build strong financial systems. They improve compliance. They strengthen operations. And last but not least, they position themselves to benefit regardless of how long the process takes. So what should cannabis operators do right now? Well, first, stay informed but stay disciplined. The rescheduling process is moving, but it is still evolving. Second, Continue planning for multiple scenarios. Prepare for a world where broader rescheduling happens. Also prepare for a world where it takes longer than expected. Prepare for a world where federal reform comes in phases rather than all at once. Third, focus on operational efficiency. The businesses that survive uncertainty are rarely the ones that are making the biggest predictions. They're the ones managing cash flow, controlling expenses, and maintaining strong compliance systems. Finally, remember that federal reform is a marathon, not a sprint. The cannabis industry has already endured years of regulatory delays, litigation, policy shifts, and political battles. This hearing is another chapter in that story. It is not the final chapter. The biggest takeaway is simple. The federal government continues moving through the rescheduling process, but the path remains complicated. The upcoming hearing has generated controversy because only opponents of broader cannabis reform were selected as participants. Yet the ultimate decision will likely depend on a much broader collection of legal, scientific, and regulatory factors. The operators who remain focused on fundamentals, while everyone else focuses on headlines, will be in the strongest position when the dust settles. Thank you for watching. Stay sharp.